Okay, so hi, I'm Qi. I'm from Queen's University, Belfast. I'm very happy to host this session for you. And it's my great honor to welcome Dr. Kiera McNeice, the Research Data Manager at Cambridge University Price and Assessment, Dessi Kirilova from Qualitative Data Repository, and Jessica Miorini, the publisher for the Linguistics journals list at Cambridge University Price and Assessment, who will present publishing qualitative outputs, challenges, and opportunities. Now let's welcome them.
Thanks very much, T. So Jess, would you like to go ahead and start with your presentation? So yes, we'll have Jess and Dessi will be giving short presentations, and then we'll have some time at the end for discussion and questions. So please feel free to put questions in the chat or in the Q&A box, and we can either answer them as we go or discuss them at the end.
Sure, let me share my screen. So thank you very much for the introduction, Shi and Kiera, and thank you for the invitation as well, Mang. So I thought for the next 15 minutes or so, I would, as I said, as Ki said, I'm the publisher for the Linguistics list at Cambridge University Press. I thought I would walk you through our list and try to make the point of how pervasive qualitative research is within the published outputs that our journals currently publish, as well as looking at what initiatives and practices publishers such as University Press can put into place to make sure that qualitative research is more easily shareable and accessible to researchers, and so how we can further support our researchers in making sure that their qualitative outputs are transparently and rigorously shared with within their community. So looking at the our linguistics portfolio, we publish 21 journals in both theoretical and applied linguistics. And because the focus of the webinar series is particularly on applied linguistics, I thought I would also call out how many of these journals are either dedicated to publishing research in applied linguistics, but also publishing some degree of applied linguistics together with theoretical linguistics as well. So as I mentioned, we publish 21 journals. All of our journals are linguistic journals are hybrid open access, so they give authors the option to publish their papers and make it available as open access. So with a license that will enable reproducibility for free. And also they all have transformative journal status, which means that they are committed to significantly transition to open access by 2025. We publish journals in a variety of subfields of linguistics, including social linguistics, phonetic anthropology, cognitive linguistics, including also psycholinguistics in that area, and language teaching and learning. And so of all of our linguistics journals, as you can see from these graphs, from these pie charts, pretty much half of the journals we publish focus on theoretical linguistics, whereas another significant portion, another comparable portion, publish applied research in applied linguistics, with then almost half of it, 25% of our journals publishing both theoretical and applied linguistics, and this mostly refers to journals that are language specific rather than publishing a different host of linguistics research in various languages. So language specific versus language agnostic journals, and specifically we have journals publishing on English, Nordic languages, Germanic languages, French, and so on. And what I wanted to show, looking at our portfolio, is that although qualitative research might be more predominant in applied linguistics, many of our journals that are on more on the theoretical side actually publish some sort of some degree of qualitative research, and this is by so a large part of our portfolio pertains and publishes research on and qualitative outputs, which are a fundamental tool for conducting linguistics research within the applied, but also the theoretical framework. And this is by showing basically that most of our guidelines and the aims and scope of our journals focus on, for example, encourages qualitative research, but only focus on the data collection method or the qualitative methodologies. But obviously, qualitative research expands to other areas of the of research and include not only the data collection methods, so open-ended data collection methods, including case studies, surveys, and interviews, which are persistent within both the applied and theoretical frameworks, but also the data collected itself that is very often qualitative in nature, and so including texts, various forms of text, such as transcripts, field notes, and documents, as well as audio and video recordings, and corpora themselves, which are in nature qualitative, so any non-numerical data, as well as data analysis methods that have a qualitative component, such as, for example, transcriptions and interpretive analysis, but also the quantitization of qualitative data, so any non-statistical data analysis method. So we can see that qualitative research is much more persistent than we think within linguistics, but within our portfolio in specifically. I've purposely added here a quote from 2007 from Dorning, highlighting how widely recognized and how importantly regarded it is qualitative research is within linguistics. Because it aids explorations in and studies where little or no prior empirical evidence is available. Let's just think about low resource languages, for example, but it also employs rich material such as video and audio and digitized text and so on, and also broadens and helps providing broader interpretations and aiding with the risk of oversimplified interpretations that sometimes quantitative studies, especially ones where with not many samples included might incur into. So as I mentioned, I purposely added these quotes showing how highlighting how qualitative research is ideal for providing insights into linguistics research, because most aspects of language acquisition and use are intrinsically and determined and shaped by social, cultural, and situational factors. So qualitative research is an ideal tool for providing insights into these research areas. At the same time, and this is, as I said, dates back to 2007. So despite the fact that most of our linguistics journals, so all 21 of them really, will publish articles that have some degree of qualitative research in them, so either including qualitative data, qualitative data collection methods or data analysis methods. Actually, only a few of them explicitly encouraged submissions of qualitative studies, and actually only two of them do explicitly mentioning in their author guidelines that submissions of qualitative and mixed methods studies are actually encouraged, and another couple of journals will encourage the publication of non-textual material to be published alongside articles such as audio files and recordings. And one of our journals is explicitly mentioning in their author guidelines that submissions to the journal should include, for empirical studies specifically, should include some degree of quantitative analysis. But at the same time, despite the fact that qualitative research might appear to be is a persistent part of linguistics, it's still looking at a keyword analysis within both the Cambridge University linguistics portfolio and the broader linguistics journals included in the journal citation report. So all of the journals that will have an impact factor. We can see that about 6 to 7% of all of the studies, of all of the original research articles published between 2018 and 2021 will be qualitative in nature, and meaning that they will have some degree of qualitative research in them, including both data and methodologies. At the same time, you can see that looking at the pie chart in the middle, that despite only a couple of our journals actively encouraging submissions of qualitative research to the journal, most of our journals will still publish qualitative research, and it is more spread than we can initially think by just looking at the author guidelines. And in particular, I've included some examples that span beyond the applied linguistics field and go into the more theoretical sides, showing how journals in our portfolio, including journals that are more closely related to, for example, the cognitive science, where quantitative methods are the main tool for conducting research, actually will still publish many highly cited outputs, including some degree of qualitative research. For example, in the methods realms, many of our journals will publish surveys and case studies, as well as more observational longitudinal studies. On the qualitative data side, it will include audio and video recordings, as I mentioned, as well as they will use corpora as the data analyzed in these outputs, and will make use of transcriptions in many cases. And as you can see, this includes journals that we might not necessarily think of as publishing much qualitative research in the realm of, for example, computational linguistics, as well as more cognitive linguistics. What is particularly interesting to note, though, is that despite the fact that only a smaller proportion of outputs in linguistics seems to be employing qualitative research in the broader definition of the term, so about 6 to 7%, we can see that qualitative research has actually grown at a much faster pace compared to linguistics outputs as a whole, and so this is becoming more and more prominent as a method and as as data itself in linguistics research across the years. I thought it was particularly striking to note that if linguistics outputs have been growing at a compound annual rate of about 15% across all of the linguistics journals in the last 6 years, we can see that the rate of growth for qualitative or mixed methods outputs has actually been 10% higher, so at about 26%, which is very encouraging for any researchers that are keen to publish in our journals, as I hope I've shown before that, you know, most of our journals, even the ones that are not explicitly encouraging qualitative submissions, actually do publish some qualitative research to some degree. As we've shown that qualitative research is becoming more and more significant and persistent within the published outputs that linguistics journals publish, and especially Cambridge University Press linguistic journals publish. I thought it would be useful to go over some of the initiatives and standards that publishers have adopted for many years now to make sure that publishers can support in making qualitative as well as quantitative research open and as accessible, as transparent, and as rigorous as possible for researchers in the linguistics community. So one of the most well-regarded standards in the open scholarship landscape in terms of promoting transparency and openness practices within the scientific landscape is the so-called top top guidelines, so the transparency and openness promotion guidelines. They were originated in the STM field, and with the aim of promoting transparency and transparent and open practices within science. And as you can see, these practices apply to the data collections, the data collected itself, and the data analysis side as well. And they provide standards that were mostly originated for quantitative studies, but we can actually easily apply it with some tweaks and some adjustments to also include qualitative research as well. And for example, I wanted to call out the fact that sorry,
just a quick reminder about time. We're over 15 minutes, so
the next slide. Sorry. In terms of pre-registration, the Center for Open Science is actually working on guidelines specifically for qualitative research pre-registration. And as well as we can see that all of these practices, so in terms of making sure that design and analysis is transparent, replication studies for qualitative research as well as archiving and making sure the data is shared as transparently and is made as accessible as possible, will be easily applied to qualitative research as well. And specifically, what Cambridge University Press has done in all of these three main areas is to support researchers, is, for example, to provide a platform for pre-printing, but also several of our journals provide the option to publish registered reports, so providing initial study design ideas to the editorial board so that they can be further explored and peer reviewed before any empirical evidence is sought out, as well as replication studies are encouraged. Submissions of replication studies are encouraged, for example, in applied linguistics and language teaching to other journals. We also support researchers with our collaboration with the QDR that Dessi will cover in more detail to archive qualitative data, and many of our journals also adopt data policies mandating data sharing, also referring to qualitative data. And as well as we support the transparent practices for qualitative data analysis, such as the annotation for transparent inquiry in collaboration with the QDR, where specific passages within the articles are annotated, and authors can provide further information about how the data was generated or analyzed. We also have open research badges in some of our journals, acknowledging researchers that have adopted open research practices. And we also allow authors to publish audio files in the supplementary information for those journals that actively encourage for recordings, for example, in audio files to be published alongside the published article. And I think that is the end of my presentation. So thank you very much for listening.
Great, thank you very much, Jess. We'll hand straight over to Dessi, who's going to talk some more about those initiatives with the qualitative data repository and ATI, among other things.
Yes, hi, and also thank you for inviting us to join this very interesting symposium on open scholarship of all sorts in applied linguistics. So give me 1 second to get my screen share going here. Kiera, can you please confirm that it's visible? In a second it'll be the way we wanted, but
yes, that's right.
Okay, thanks. So yes, my name is Dessi Kirilova, and I work at the qualitative data repository, where we do a lot of things, including collaborate with Cambridge University Press on facilitating basically some open scholarship practices for researchers. And so the way I'm gonna talk about what we do here is a little bit from the more kind of broader picture, abstract positioning of data sharing, in particular qualitative data sharing within the spectrum of open scholarship practices. And then I'll get to some of the barriers to people being able to do that more frequently and with more ease, and how, in my opinion, repositories like QDR, not only, but like QDR, can help. And of course, I'll speak specifically to the one that I know best and the kinds of things that we do when people from different disciplines come to us. And at the very end, I hope I have a few minutes to actually illustrate with a linguistics example, different ways of both using the shared data and the annotations that Jess mentioned that we have developed here in order to, again, facilitate transparency in people's research. So, oh, excuse me, I'm having trouble moving the slides. There we go. So open scholarship, again, this is just to start from somewhere, and I think a lot of the presentations yesterday probably spoke to the goals and aims of that phrase. The goal is to make research and education more accessible, more reproducible, more freely available. And there's debates and considerations on each of those phrases, but the idea is that the traditional model of scholarship has long been too closed, too exclusive, too opaque, if you will, even to other academics. And there's various things that people can do to improve on that traditional model. Now, I wanted to locate what I'm talking about within that very big umbrella term, right? And so I like this particular visual of the pillars of open scholarship, and many of them have to do with the publication of articles, which is the traditional outputs in research that Jess talked about. But then there's a lot of other components. And what I'm going to talk about really focuses on these three pillars to some degree. So open infrastructure, fair data and open outputs, and research integrity. And even more narrowly the fair data aspect of the whole enterprise. Now, what individual researchers can do, the various open scholarship practices that exist out there, again, I'm not even going to summarize them because they've been mentioned numerous times during the symposium. But just to say that there's many different things people do could do in addition to data sharing when data sharing is either not appropriate or not feasible for any number of reasons. So it's not, I want to say that even though I come from a repository perspective where we do everything possible to facilitate data sharing itself, we do recognize that it's not always possible. It's not always the best solution. And we just encourage people to think where in that smorgasbord of options they can find a practice that works for them in a specific study, in a specific research project, and enhance the transparency of their work. So even if data sharing is not it, is there something else that could be done? The various factors that have led to more data sharing than in the past, I'm just very quickly gonna touch upon them. Some of them, we can discuss them as top down, things that mandates that come from journals, from and publishers and funders in particular, and we can think of them as kind of the enforcers of data sharing, for the lack of a better word. They really are trying to encourage it by instituting such mandates for data availability in an attempt to multiply the benefits of the resources that they spend. And in the belief, I think, that transparency actually leads to better scholarship and leads to better cross-researcher kind of evaluation of publications too. Now, another factor that has led to more data sharing than in the past is the technological affordances that we have. Most data today are born digital. There's places like QDR and many others, research data services, that and repositories that exist to facilitate data sharing, something that was not necessarily the case even 20 years ago. And then researchers, of course, are the main agents of implementation of open scholarship and data sharing practices. They feel these expectations for more transparency, more openness from colleagues in academia, from these other actors in academia, but from society more broadly as well. And in the case of qualitative studies, I want to say sometimes even from the study participants who would love to be able maybe to see some aspect of the data that they participated in creating being shared back to them. So that's sometimes when I talk to researchers, that's a new way for them to think about why maybe they want to think about sharing their data at the end of a study. And then internal motivations, at least some people, and I'm going to guess many of you who've chosen to join the symposium, believe that actually data sharing may be good for their own research work and their own practices. Data sharing allows researchers to show the rigor, the richness of their work, again, especially in the case of qualitative data, which are indeed so rich. It enables people to do even better science and find maybe unexpected potential collaborators. So those are some factors that, we should not always think about them as sticks and kind of mandates, but the positive aspect of why maybe you want to engage in data sharing or think about it. And this is almost kind of the flip side of the same. What do people use shared data for? And I can speak to that, again, coming from the repository perspective, because people do share the data that have been published on QDR. Secondary analysis and collaboration is obviously the most predictable use, and that it's an important one. But I did want to make a plug for a few other possibilities. So transparency of specific publications also makes sense in the context of journal publications, the way just spoke about them. But then teaching and training, and that's not one that people often think about, but teaching and training can be greatly enhanced when people, when students have access to real data, so to speak, but the ones that have been shared in an appropriate format, that they can learn, for example, methods training with, or even just seeing how the research process worked for somebody else in their work, so they can maybe think of modeling that once they start conducting their own independent research. And then again, that point that I'm very fond of making, because again, it is new for researchers to think about it that way, giving back to participants in the communities that are being researched, sometimes with direct sharing of data back to individuals, but then also the bigger aspect of not over researching the same communities, which sometimes happens in certain fields. I wanted to talk here with the help of sorry, somebody gave me a gentle reminder about time, but I don't think that's right. Apologies, I just don't think that's right. Sorry, a recent study that I saw by one of our co-organizers for the symposium that I found very interesting, because it replicates to some degree things that we know from other disciplines as well, but with the particular eye toward people in linguistics. What are the main barriers? So all the positive things that I talked about are a fact, but that doesn't mean that they're sufficient for people to engage widely in data sharing. So what are some of the main barriers? The takeaways being that there's two that most prominent: concerns about the ethics of sharing data, especially, I mean, again, this is especially prominent for qualitative researchers, and as well as, in addition to the broader ethical concern, just more narrowly, whether sharing data would be in compliance with ethics review board agreements for the research to be done, and then the time that people think it would take, the additional time that it would take to prepare data for sharing. And those are both valid, valid concerns. What I come to argue here is that among the various possibilities for solving these, the role of repositories is very important. So repositories to the rescue. And again, because I don't know how many people in the audience are familiar with the various repositories that exist out there, I clearly come from one very specific niche one that is dedicated to publishing qualitative data, but there's many other ones. There's institutional repositories affiliated with the universities, some of which, not all, but some of which would also be able to publish data. Then there's self-deposit generalist repositories, domain and disciplinary repositories. You may be most familiar with those within the field of linguistics. There's some long-standing ones, like the LDC at University of Pennsylvania, IRIS, which I think has been mentioned again in a lot of the literature from this symposium. Clarin, obviously super important in the European research infrastructure. But then things like Dryad, Zenodo, and Figshare, and I don't know how many of you may have tried to use data from there, or potentially yourselves have tried to deposit. I just did very quick searches on linguistics without really knowing the field very well. And the number of data sets that came back ranged from some 40 something, let's say in Dryad, to almost 4,000 in Figshare. So I thought that was kind of very interesting that for one reason or another, well, these repositories do obviously attract linguistics researchers who want to deposit their data. And there's a great difference in sort of how many you can find in each one. I will skip this in the interest of, well, no, actually, I will not skip this, sorry. Why am I making the argument for sharing data in a repository versus some of the other options? For example, research appendices through journals, or what people more commonly used to do, again, 15 to 20 years ago, saying that the data will be available upon request, which certainly has become obsolete. Like that's not a good enough solution nowadays, given the other possibilities I talked about. So what are the benefits? They really come down to making the data most findable, most accessible, interoperable, and reusable. This kind of from the data world or in the information science world, this acronym of FAIR data. And so providing stable links, things like digital object identifiers that make a citation to the data kind of permanent so that it could be found again without the possibility of link rot. Long-term digital preservation. I mean, that's something that no individual researcher really should be burdened with trying to worrying about over time. Are the file formats becoming obsolete? Do they need to update them and all of that? Professional repositories do that as a matter of course. Meeting institutional requirements, again, and by that I mean these funder and journal mandates. The funder mandates more and more clearly lean in the direction of recommending only data sharing through repositories as the better solution for meeting those requirements. And then curated repositories. So not all of the ones that I listed there are curated, but the domain ones and the qualitative data repository, for example, are, which means somebody there, a real life staff person, would work with the depositor to make their data to help them document their data well, and then will provide the long-term preservation over time. And access controls, which is something I want to talk about later, because that's part of the solution to the ethical component as well as the kind of regulatory compliance component. Yes, I see the 3-minute warning now. Thank you. So I will skip all this. I mean, I'm including a lot more slides here so that people who may review this after the talk get a sense of some of the other things that I won't get a chance to talk about, or maybe we'll get to them in the Q&A. But I wanted to give a quick sense. QGR was established as a niche repository to specifically address the needs of qualitative researchers across the social sciences, broadly conceived. Our origin was really in political science, but it's no longer the case. Now we're truly interdisciplinary. We also serve an international audience of researchers. And I wanted to give a very quick sense with screenshots of real data that has been deposited with us that does not necessarily come from the field of linguistics, but I think many of you can imagine being used also in linguistic studies, because a lot of the things that we have, really our bread and butter is transcript. So that's a very clear one here. Then we have a lot of videos. This happens to be from, again, collected on a political science topic, presidential video campaigns, but I can certainly imagine a lot of possible analyses coming from different fields, including linguistics. Then we have some handwritten archival documents, not only, and various administrative documents from around the world as well. So back to those two key challenges that were highlighted in the article that I referenced earlier. The two challenges were concern for the extra time that it might take to prepare the data for sharing, and concern for doing this ethically, as well as within the regulatory framework of human participant research. The solution, the number one solution, is research data management and planning. And what I mean by that is for people to start thinking about any project that they undertake with the possibility of data sharing at the end. That is what it takes in order to both streamline your own research and your own process. If you make a plan for how you're going to handle the data from very early on, and then just stick to it and do it consistently as the project develops, that means by the end of the project, there isn't that much extra. In some cases, there's nothing extra that needs to be done. The data may already be in the shape that they need to be in order to then share more broadly. But even in the cases where something additional needs to be done, it becomes much more minimal than if the data collection itself was not done according to any kind of preconceived plan. And it's very, the data very messy, it need to be reorganized, renamed, then it's indeed a lot more work. So if people start thinking about the data sharing component, which even though it comes at the very end, if people start thinking about it in the beginning and plan and organize early, create documentation for all the various steps and choices that they make throughout the project, and think about data sharing early on, that will be my next slide and my next kind of key solution, then that facilitate or removes those barriers to sharing that people currently seem to feel. Because again, in the interest of time, I can't possibly give you any advice on how to do this. I mean, that's a big part of what QGR does, is actually educates people on how to do this in the context of any one individual project, as well as kind of in general trainings to graduate students and so on. I did select some recent resources that exist online, including something that I was very pleasantly surprised by, just came out this year, the Open Handbook of Linguistic Data Management. So I think any of you who are interested in this, who have not come across this title, should look it up. And it actually is an open text, very much in the spirit of open scholarship more broadly. So that's one that you can look at, that guides you through the various phases in the research process and how you can think about doing various things with your data at each of those points, with an eye towards sharing in the end. And then the mantra course, which has been online for a while, also free and self-guided course on these topics more broadly, without being associated with any specific discipline. And the key solution number two, again, it kind of comes from the first one that I talked about, which is thinking about all of this well in advance, also will allow you as a researcher to figure out how to ask for the appropriate consent for data sharing. So people whom you get involved in your research do need to be informed about what it is that you're planning to do with their data. But in order for you to tell them how you're gonna, yes, share the data, but share them appropriately, and maybe under access conditions, if that's of relevance, maybe de-identified again, if that's important. In order for you to be able to spell this out for them, in the interest of truly informed consent, you need to have figured it out first. And again, I will say the best way I think that you can do this is figuring out the appropriate repository where you may want to put your data at the end of the project, and contact them early on. All the curated ones, that is our preferred mode of working with depositors, starting from the very, very early planning stages of any one project. And repositories offer, to be honest, fairly similar, but slightly kind of tailored technological solutions, access control. So knowing exactly what you can offer is very important. So, work with somebody who can help you think through those options, can help you then lay them out very concisely and clearly for participants in the informed consent. And then that would enable people to then agree to all of that. And I found really, really, again, helpful for linguistics in particular. There's many other versions of this more broadly in the social sciences, but TalkBank has really wonderful advice on all of these steps, including some sample consent scripts that I, again, recommend to any of you who are struggling with this or want to think about it in the context of your research to go to. So I'm going to skip all of that and just leave here during our Q&A, I will leave this visual illustration of the annotation for transparent inquiry linguistics example that we have. And if some of you want to talk about it, then I can go over that as well. So thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Dessi. So we do have some time for questions. I'm aware that we're almost at the end of the hour, but I think we can possibly squeeze a few more minutes into the break if people have questions to ask or want to talk further about any of this. I don't think I've seen anything in the chat. Does anyone listening in have any questions?
Maybe we need to wait 1 or 2 minutes because the audience are perhaps like typing in the chat box.
Yeah.
Okay.
But otherwise, it might be useful. It might be interesting, Dessi, to have a look at that ATI example.
Yeah, I was going to say if I should share my screen again. Okay, thanks. Yeah, I'll do that, Kiera.
We can just put that on the screen as an example, one way of making qualitative research more transparent. But yeah, I would think the key takeaway is that although it doesn't necessarily, it may not be obvious that there's a lot of support out there for qualitative research, that even if a journal doesn't explicitly encourage to publish qualitative results, or a lot of them will accept and support those sorts of outputs. And also that there are so many repositories and so many resources out there to help facilitate sharing data and making research transparent in other ways. And sometimes it's a little tricky to find them, but I think, yeah, Desi's slides have a good few resources in them that can help with that sort of thing. So there is now quite a lot of infrastructure and quite a lot of extensive support out there in the research world for making qualitative outputs more openly available. So if we don't have any specific questions, Dessi, do you want to just quickly explain what ATI is and how this is increasing transparency in qualitative research? Oh, you're muted. You're still on mute, Dessi. Sorry.
Apologies, sorry. Okay, so this is an example of something that is quite different from what I actually was talking about, which is data sharing. It incorporates it, but it goes beyond that. It's an example of a new tool, technique, maybe are the best ways to describe it, that we at QGR developed in collaboration with Cambridge University Press. Basically, if you see here, this is an article published in one of the Cambridge journals that just talked about. I can't see the writing here. I think it's English Language and Linguistics is the name. Yeah, but overlaid over that, and this is just the regular page that anybody would go to read the article. But overlaid over that, you can see a set of annotations on the right, which the authors created in the interest of being able to show more of their kind of background thinking that didn't quite make it into the article, mostly due to word constraints that we're all familiar with from journals. But even going beyond that, just kind of explaining why they chose a given piece of evidence that they included. And then again, in the cases where there is an underlying data file, they're discussing a specific kind of pronunciation peculiarity, I guess, in different regions of Britain, I think. But anyway, so they have a bunch of data files that are their underlying qualitative data that they're analyzing and using in this article. So these data files were deposited with QGR and are linked here within the annotations with the additional analytical notes explaining what it is in that particular, data file that they're using and why that particular piece of recording is informative here and so on. So that's what these annotations are on the side. Again, you can't really see it as well. That's why I kind of described what's in each annotation. But that's a technique that is open source. I mean, again, we work on it with the idea of making it part of open scholarship so that people could do this. And sometimes people have used it. I don't have a linguistics example of what I'm going to say now, but sometimes people have used it in lieu of data sharing when data sharing was deemed to be not appropriate or consent was not obtained from the beginning. Still, in these analytic notes, a lot more information could be given about the process of collecting the data and the kinds of things that the data, are telling the authors, even without the actual underlying file being available, that enhances the both integrity and transparency of the published output. So this is just by way of illustrating that this field is the field of open science, I mean, across disciplines. This approach is being constantly developed. There are opportunities there, and as long as somebody is willing to engage, you can find a good way to enhance, to some degree, the transparency and integrity of your work, even if not, going to some kind of ideal scenario where everything is always shared with everybody, because that's not always appropriate, especially in qualitative research.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, is that transparency isn't necessarily an all or nothing. It's about improvements. It's about making things more transparent, even if we can't necessarily reach the absolute ideal in every case. And there's a lot of ways to do that for qualitative research. Yeah, even if, as you say, there are those ethical limitations sometimes on sharing data, which are of course entirely sensible and reasonable. Well, if there are no questions, then I guess that's all from us in terms of supporting sharing of qualitative outputs.
Okay, thank you for sharing. I think is that all right? Okay, so now perhaps we could just have a short break